vegetable broth soup. Um, although it's a vegetable soup, it's not a vegetarian soup. We have a meat broth that is going to be what's going to accompany with us. Um, for this soup, you should soak your beans a day ahead of time. Okay, I already have some cooked beans that I did ahead of time, and some cooked pasta that I did ahead of time. Um, if you should have received a container like this guy right here with dry navy beans from us. Make sure that you pour enough water to get to the top of the container, and you can cover that and refrigerate it overnight, and the beans will grow about 2.5 times of what they are. And if you have any beans floating right when you pour the water in, know that those beans are no good, so you can discard those. Anyways, your container should look like this. You put it in your refrigerator, let it sit overnight. When you come back the next day, the water should be pretty much gone, and your beans should be about 2.5 times what you have there. When I did it, it came all the way to the top with beans. Okay, for our ingredients today, we have our broth we mentioned earlier. I have a little bit of cooked pasta. I know that the pasta is not in the recipe. This is an addition to this recipe. Okay, some of you guys have penne pasta, some of you guys have acini di pepe, and some of you guys have fettuccine. Just cook the pasta ahead of time and cool it down with cold water, and then you can set it aside, and we'll add that to the soup at the very end. I have about a half a potato, small dice. I have some onion that I sliced, and I sliced it with the veins of the onion, so we don't cry nearly as much. It wilts faster, and the onion doesn't really fall apart when you're cutting it. I have some small diced carrot, small diced celery, small diced tomato. I got some shredded cabbage, and I have some zucchini that I cut in half long ways. I took the seeds off of it, and I cut it into a small dice. And those are the ingredients that we need for this soup. Oh, and I have a piece of Parmesan. You'll have a piece of Parmesan in your kit. Cut it in half, and half of it is going to be introduced to the broth in the soup. The other half is for garnishing. All right, so let's get this soup started. I'm going to preheat my pan. Setting my containers in place here. Okay, so we're gonna make a quart of soup. All the soups this week are gonna yield about 1.5 quarts, because we have a quart of stock, and then we should have about 2 cups of ingredients going in the soup. Okay, this guy's heating up well. I'm going to pour a little bit of oil in my pan. You want to have just enough oil to cover the bottom of the pan, okay? And we're going to start with our onions, okay? And we're going to cook these vegetables from hard vegetables all the way to the softest of vegetables, okay? And your recipe calls for this step to take 10 to 15 minutes. I think it all depends on how high the heat is. We don't want any brown on the onions. We just want to cook them and wilt them and sweat them a little bit. If you get a little bit of brown, it's okay, but we're not looking for that. So we're not tending to apply high heat to this. Medium heat should be good enough. I know in the other video I added the carrots at the same time. You can do so if you like. But for this recipe, I'm going to try to adhere to the recipe as much as I can. Okay. Another thing to know about this recipe is that it calls for green beans, and you'll notice that there's no green beans in your kit. We replace the green beans on the recipe, and the addition is pasta. I feel like the pasta brings another texture to this soup, which is really important when it comes to Emilia Romagna, since you have all kinds of different textures from the vegetables. Alright, our onions are translucent, and then our next hard vegetable is going to be the carrots. So I'm going to bring the carrots in. Maybe a little bit of celery goes in, it's no big deal. Just avoid putting the soft vegetables, which are the zucchini and the tomatoes and the cabbage, in there quite yet, okay? And I'm going to sweat this for a couple of minutes as well. One thing that is great to do when you're cooking vegetables like this and you don't want them to brown is to have a small addition of salt onto the dish. The salt will make the vegetables release some moisture, and it will start cooking them, and we'll kind of steam them a little bit, so that way we won't get any brown in there. Emilia Romagna is a soup from Emilia Romagna, which is the northeast region of Italy. Most of the farms and ranches in Italy are in the northern region of Italy, and the valleys before the Alps, where we meet with where Italy meets with Switzerland. This soup comes from it's basically a hodgepodge of like different vegetables. But although it sounds simple, like just a simple vegetable soup, it's crucial that we cook the vegetables to the right consistency or the right doneness in order to create an interesting texture. Okay. Usually, simple things require a little bit of finesse or skill in order to refine them and make them taste very special. Okay, I think our celery and carrots are shiny. Our celery is kind of half translucent. Our onions are looking good. They're starting to pick up some color, which it tells me that it's time for the next addition of vegetables into this soup. Okay, so I'm going to add the celery. Okay, and I'm going to add the zucchini. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to add the cabbage. I'm going to add half of the Parmesan cheese. I'm going to add the potatoes. I'm going to drain these guys here real quick. Alright. Once you add the potatoes, go ahead and mix it around. The potatoes are the heaviest, and they will fall to the bottom of the pan. And then we're going to add enough broth to this to cover the vegetables. That way we can cook the potatoes. Before you add the broth, turn your stove to high. That way we don't shock the pan. Every time we're doing a big cold addition of vegetables or broth onto a pan, we want to bring the heat up, and that way we'll maintain the amount of the heat that we have in there currently. I'm going to add the broth. And notice that I'm not going to add all the broth. I'm just going to add about half of the broth. And the idea is that I bring this back to temperature as fast as possible. I'm going to give it one more touch of salt. And then we're going to bring this up to speed. And the goal here is that the potatoes cook all the way. Once the potatoes are ready, we're pretty much in the finishing touches of this soup. Um, you will see that your brodo has a little bit of fat, and the fat is going to come to the top of the soup. You don't want to remove that. You want to leave it in there. That is actually going to give some body to this soup. We want, although the soup is a vegetable soup, we want it to feel hearty. So we're going to leave that fat in. All right, team. The potatoes are cooked. You can tell by just trying one. You'll notice that the broth turned color a little bit. It's kind of whitish now, and the reason for that is because of the chunk of Parmesan that is in there. If you try the broth at this moment, you'll see that the broth tastes a little bit like cheese, which is a plus. Okay. At this point, I'm going to add my zucchini and my tomatoes, and I'm going to cook this for another 6 to 8 minutes. Okay, the idea is to warm that zucchini, or warm the tomatoes and cook the zucchini a little bit. If your soup feels like it's too chunky, or like you don't have enough broth like mine, add more. You don't have to add it all. I think the idea behind Emilia Romagna is that it's a really hearty soup. So you want to have a lot of vegetables in there before the vegetable to broth ratio should be like 60-40. 60 being the vegetables. Okay. We're gonna bring this to a boil one more time, so I'm going to crank my stove to high, and then once we bring it to a boil, we'll add the pasta, we'll add the beans, we'll try it, season it properly, and then we should be good to go. When you're mixing the soup, feel for your piece of Parmesan, because it might want to stick to the bottom of your pot, okay? So it's important that you make sure it's not burning. Even though you're in liquid, if the cheese sticks to the bottom of your pot, it will start burning. You can tell by my spoon and my vegetables sticking to my spoon, the cheese is somewhat melted in here. I see my soup is almost to a simmer, so my pasta is cold as I shocked it with ice water after I cooked it. I'm going to add that now and have it come up with the soup. It's important to know that you don't want to leave it in there if you know, put it in there if you know. Now I'm going to grab some of my beans and add them in here. I know this morning I just poured them on the top of the soup for presentation purposes, but for what you're doing at home, you can just add the beans to just get warm through onto your soup. And now all we have left is tasting it and seasoning it. A little bit more salt. if you like pepper, go ahead and add pepper. I personally don't like pepper on this soup, so I'm going to leave it without. Then we're gonna give it one more taste. And this time I'm grabbing some of the vegetables. That's pretty perfect. Things that I'm looking for. You're looking for the soup to have some body. So you want it to be light when you eat it, but you want it to have that sticky feeling in your lips. You want different textures in all the vegetables. So you should have soft vegetables, crunchy vegetables. Your beans should be cooked through. When you're cooking beans, if you didn't have a chance to soak them overnight and you just have to do this today, place them in water in a pot, medium heat. Add maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda, and the alkalinity will help them soften quickly. Do not add salt. If you add salt to the beans, they will never get soft. The membrane in the outside will break, but the bean itself will stay hard. And they would take about, if you don't soak them, they'll take about an hour and a half. If you soak them, they should take about 35 minutes to cook. Okay. We're also looking for some balance in here, and what we're looking for is a little bit of salty and a little bit of sweet. Okay. So, and then when you finish your soup, like this guy, which is completed, I'm gonna move it over to the side. I have a nice bowl right here, and I have a ladle. Anytime I serve this soup, I like grabbing a lot of the solids first. I'm placing the solids in the middle of my bowl. And you want a mound of vegetables coming out of the bowl. And then I go back and just grab broth and pour some broth in here, but I don't want broth to cover my vegetables. I just want some broth in there. And after you pour olive oil in here, take your microplane or your peeler and take the other chunk of Parmesan and shave a bunch of cheese over it. Okay, and that's Emilia Romagna.